All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Here we go.
Inspire Washington acknowledges that we and our partners statewide are on the homelands of Native peoples who have lived in this region from time immemorial. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where all of our cultural partners live and work. Currently, there are 42 tribes, 35 of which are federally recognized, that share traditional homelands and waterways in what is now Washington state. Some of these are nations and confederacies that represent multiple tribes and bands, and Inspire Washington recognizes all of them. We express our deepest respect for and gratitude towards these original and current caretakers and culture bearers of the region. As a cultural sector, we acknowledge our responsibility to establish and maintain relationships with these tribes and Native peoples in support of tribal sovereignty and the inclusion of their voices in teaching art, heritage, natural science, and cultural programming. We pledge that our relationships will consist of mutual trust, respect, and reciprocity. I'm Manny, Cawaling, Executive Director for Inspire Washington. I live in the central area of Seattle. We acknowledge that King County is on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish. Before we get started, we at Inspire Washington think it's always really important to share a little bit about ourselves. I think it's always important for you to ask who is representing me on behalf of the cultural sector. I want to assure you, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a cultural worker, much like you. I'm also a third generation Washingtonian. I was born and raised in King County, and I also have family in Chelan and Grant. I first got my bug for creative expression in high school. It wasn't trigonometry that got me to school every day. In fact, I boarded the early bus and arrived before most students did because choir started at 7:30. And I was often one of the last students to leave because theater rehearsed well after football practice got over. Throughout the years, I've been a theater performer, a teaching artist, and a theater director. And I've also had the great honor of working for a variety of different cultural organizations in Seattle, such as my time at the Wing as their exhibit developer, as the associate artistic director for the Northwest Asian American Theater, the managing director at the Langston Hughes Performing Art Institute, and most recently, been able to express my love for the creative expression of young people as the executive director for Youth Theater Northwest. And I'm really honored to be able to represent you on behalf of the cultural sector.
And hello, my name is Jessi Wasson. I'm the Programs and Operations Manager. Much like Manny, I was also a theater kid. I grew up on Tiger Mountain outside of Issaquah and started doing kid stage at Village Theater when I was just 10 years old, and grew up as that being a regular activity after school. As I grew up, I realized that behind the scenes was more what I gravitated towards. So I became a stage manager and pursued that in my college degree. And after that, I did quite a bit of stage managing in the larger theaters of Seattle, as well as the smaller theaters. So all over the Puget Sound region, did a lot of stage managing. Went to grad school, came back, did some work as a company manager for a couple different theaters, and then joined Manny at Youth Theater Northwest as the development director. So those of you who write grants and throw galas and do fundraising, I understand the challenges of that work, especially in a small nonprofit. And we're so excited to be able to help you and support that work. I also spent some time as the family programs manager at the Jewish Community Center as part of my love for heritage work, as also my background in my family. And I'm thrilled now to be representing Inspire Washington and combining my love for arts and culture, as well as this great state, as since I am a fourth generation Washingtonian, I've got Manny beat by one. Now my family lives all across the state. So super excited to be here, and thank you so much for having us. I'm going to turn it over to Madeline to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Madeline Dalton. I'm the outreach coordinator at Inspire Washington. I also have a history with Youth Theater Northwest, which is how I know Manny and Jessi. I was a student there, and I now, outside of my work at Inspire Washington, am a professional actor, and I've performed regionally all across the country. And I'm really happy to be able to have my roots in advocating for culture while I also get to do something fun on stage. And I mostly do advocacy and admin work. So today during our call, I'll just be monitoring the tech side of things. And if you have any questions, you can throw them in the chat and I'll help to answer.
Wonderful. And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed guest for our presentation, Claire.
Hi, everybody. My name is Claire Miccio. I'm the Government and Community Relations Manager at 4Culture, and I have a background in public policy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Claire. So here is the agenda of our meeting today. We are going to give you a little overview of Inspire Washington for those of you who don't know who we are and what we do, just so you have a better sense of that. And then we'll dive right into cultural access. We'll give you the history of it. We'll tell you all about it. We'll have Claire explain the future funding model. We'll talk about how it works. We'll talk about what's happened in the past, how it's changed, and why we're bringing you here today. And then we'll look forward and talk about next steps for cultural access, and of course, take any questions you may have about the program. So, Inspire Washington, here's our mission. I'm going to give you a few moments to read through that. Founded in 2019 with the merger of Cultural Access Washington and the Washington State Arts Alliance, Inspire Washington is your cultural advocacy organization. We exist to serve every community from Spokane to Seattle, from Kennewick to Kitsap, from Wenatchee to Whatcom, and right here in King County. We aim to serve all communities by supporting all of you, our cultural partners. You are the ones that inspire Washington. All of us share common values, passions, and beliefs. Your cultural work adds uplifting value to community life, bringing joy, forging human connections, and inspiring tremendous social impact. You are not nice to have. On the contrary, your community needs you right now and more than ever. You are essential to connecting communities after 2+ years of distancing and polarization. Together, we are mighty. Inspire Washington's advocacy coalition combines and focuses the energy of thousands of people and organizations and businesses that provide science, heritage, and arts activities and experiences to every one of Washington's cities and towns. But what do we do every day and year round? Coalition building. We are connecting galleries on Orcas Island with the Symphony in Vancouver and music venues in downtown Seattle. We are building a big cultural team and coordinating with allies like tourism, education, economic development, just to name a few. Advocacy ensures someone is sticking up for you, the cultural sector, and representing us within every space where decisions are made and resources distributed. Like with members of Congress when we advocated for pandemic relief and in state government. But what's next? What other resources need to be developed so that your work may thrive? Is it money, laws and policy, or something else? We want to know. We know you crave and rely on community within the industry. We're all holding each other up right now. Our education programs provide networking and professional development opportunities, like the Cultural Congress, our statewide conference, which we hope to gather again in person next year. And Madeline, our outreach coordinator, is always developing toolkits to make your advocacy and community work easier. We're committed to representing science, heritage, and arts organizations across Washington state by spending more time listening, showing up in person or virtually, and working in towns and communities across the state. Thank you for welcoming us today. We are your voice and your seat at the table. We are amplifying your story and drawing focused attention to what you need. We are your cheerleader. We believe in you and will fight for your work. We are connecting every corner of the state. So it's not about what Eastern Washington needs or what Western Washington needs, but what we need as a whole united sector. We are your team. You can't do this work alone, but we can accomplish big things together. We are the lighthouse, shining a beam towards the horizon to spotlight opportunities and foresee potential challenges or threats. So when we talk about the cultural sector, or just kind of culture in general, in our work at Inspire Washington, this is who we're talking about. We represent 3 buckets of work. The first being science and technology, which includes nature conservancies, fish hatcheries, zoos, aquariums, and science centers. The second is heritage, which includes historical and cultural heritage sites, museums, and the humanities. For example, the Elwell Clallam Heritage Center out in Port Angeles. And finally, the arts, which includes theater, music, hip hop, spoken word, film, visual arts, and community festivals like Pista Sanaya, the largest Filipino festival in Washington.
So what is cultural access? I have had a job like yours. I've been in your shoes. I understand the many challenges you face, especially now. Your work is still challenged by the long trailing tail of the COVID pandemic. Your cultural programs are under resourced, and yet they provide measurable benefits to the people you serve. Our communities face many barriers to access our programs, and some of those barriers are systemic and historic. We have a vision that will transform life in King County by inspiring broad cultural engagement and cementing cultural programming, the work that you do at the heart of community life. Cultural access is many things, but it is a publicly funded program that expands community access to cultural programs in science, heritage, and the arts. It's also a state law. It's a funding program funded by the government. It's big, it's game changing. It's a transformative opportunity that our cultural sector needs right now. Cultural access will significantly expand the public support you receive so that your program may fully recover and thrive. Let me start by explaining the basics. Created by the state legislature, cultural access provides taxing authorities to cities and counties. Cultural access is voter approved, and when the voters approve it, it lifts base sales tax in any community by 1/10 of 1%. Cultural access increases public access to cultural activities. It also expands cultural education activities for public school students at both schools and cultural facilities, and includes expenses that include transportation. It also provides sustainable funding for not-for-profit science, heritage, and arts organizations. Based on the 2019 tax collection, a cultural access program would invest $72 million annually in King County. Now let's talk about why it matters. I'm involved in every conversation about cultural access. Considering the times we're in and the challenges we've faced most recently, it's easy to get caught up in the money related to cultural access, but it's so much more than that. We all call King County home. So I'm speaking to you right now as a community member. Imagine how an implemented cultural access program will transform community life. Imagine the deep impact of a program. Cultural equity. There are 39 cities and towns in King County and a tremendous amount of unincorporated areas. And we know that in King County, not every community has the same level of access to cultural programs. Academic success and meaningful experiences for students can all be a result of investing more fully into the cultural activities in schools. And also, we know the multiplying effect of money that's invested in cultural programs, how it ripples out throughout the community, how it spurs local businesses and creates greater competitiveness. We also know that a community with rich cultural offerings just expands quality of life and provides more things for people to do on a Friday night as well as on a Tuesday afternoon. After 2 years of isolation and distancing, imagine how cultural life can sew our communities back together again, making them vibrant and connecting people who have been distanced for too long. And also, so many of our organizations struggle with just being able to have reliable funding. Cultural access can provide that. And also, from all the tours that we've done across the state, Inspire Washington knows what's really important. Post-pandemic, the sector really needs recovery with significant job creation and program expansion. I also want to call on your imagination again. So step into the Zoom time machine with me. Let's imagine it's 2030 something. Cultural access was approved by voters and the 7 years of initial authorization have gone by. $500 million was invested in cultural engagement. Who are we then in this future vision of ourselves after so many students have had greater cultural activities in their school and also opportunities that took them out into the community? When all of our neighborhood spaces in all of our 39 cities and towns had more access to cultural programming, when the vast majority of money that was invested from cultural access really drove new jobs who are we then as a community after all of that cultural access investment? That is a dream that we're really excited about in Inspire Washington.
So I'm going to give you a brief history of cultural access and kind of how it came about to be here in Washington State. It all started in 2006, a long time ago, with the Puget Sound Regional Council report. And what that report called out was the importance of cultural businesses and cultural experiences for the economic driver of the economy in our region. The Puget Sound Regional Council is a group of folks that is in 4 different counties, all along kind of the hub of the Puget Sound. So they called this out, and this was really exciting for the cultural sector because finally there were people realizing and calling out the fact that cultural businesses are such drivers in the economy. So they took that information and did outreach to Spokane, Tri-Cities, and Vancouver, and did some more research about how the creative economy and the cultural sector drives the economy in those regions as well. So with that information, they decided to go to the legislation for the first time in 2009 to create a cultural access program legislation. And it was introduced as House Bill 1666 and Senate Bill 5786. Well, as you can imagine, it takes a long time for a new idea to come to fruition. So a group of cultural access folks tried for a number of years as different bills, different wording. And then finally in 2015, almost 10 years after the idea was initially started, it passed in 2015 as Senate House Bill 2263 and created the Cultural Access Legislation Program. And at that point, now cities and counties have the option to create their own program. So of course, King County, being the main advocate for this legislation, jumped on the opportunity and ran their first campaign in 2017. This was called Access for All, Proposition 1. And King County Cultural Access narrowly lost by a mere 4,000 votes. Out of the nearly 500,000 people that voted, this lost by only 4,000. So as you can imagine, that margin was very, very small. But then in 2018, Tacoma, with great success, were able to pass their own program with 67% of the votes for it. And then in 2019, looking back on the cultural access campaign for King County, the people that were part of that committee realized that there were some real problems with the legislation specifically called out for King County. So they went back to the legislation to amend the law to make the changes during the 2019 and 2020 legislative session. Now, positively that was passed, but unfortunately it was passed on March 6th of 2020. So just a week before the shutdown. So there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to jump on that chance of being able to now talk about the changes and the amazing things that happened with that legislation. So of course, everything was kind of paused because of the pandemic. But just this spring in April, the city of Olympia was also able to pass their own cultural access campaign with a 58% approval rating. And we're so excited to hear once they start collecting funds, the amazing things that happens in Olympia with their cultural programming. So who is eligible for this funding? You must be a nonprofit 501c3 organization. You must have a mission in science, heritage, or the arts, which also includes technology. And you must be providing programming or experiences available to the general public. So you have to have something that anyone can attend or anyone can do. It can just buy a ticket or just show up. Who is not eligible to receive funding? So the legislation does call out a list of different businesses and organizations that cannot receive the funding, such as state agencies and city governments and private foundations, etc. Most of these things are to avoid double dipping. So we can go into a little bit more detail if you have questions related to that. Who will administer the cultural access program? Well, first, the King County Council has to approve the levy and put it on the ballot. So there would be that's the first step. And then 4Culture, which is our county agency, will create and administer the funding program. The program will last 7 years. So once the legislation is put on the ballot, the voters approve it, then that's good for 7 years. And then after that, there has to be a renewal vote. And Inspire Washington, what is our role in all of this? Well, we advocate for the program and propose or lobby when changes need to be made within the legislature. We educate community members about the opportunity, and we also help folks with local campaigns such as Olympia and Tacoma, and hopefully in the future, other regions like San Juan County and maybe even Walla Walla. We also strategize opportunities for King County, and we will be the main drivers and will champion the public campaign when the time is right for cultural access here in our county.
So I want to talk a little bit about the campaign in 2017 and share with you how it shaped our vision for a future campaign in King County. The King County Council deliberated in the public process that referred cultural access onto the ballot, and that process was March to May of 2017. The initiative was called Access for All, or Proposition 1. You know, from the very beginning, the program had real challenges. There were, as Jessi talked about, concerns about the underlying legislation. The original cultural access legislation had funding provisions for King County only. So any program that would be running King County, the funding formulas, how the money would be distributed, all of that was outlined in the legislation. And there were flaws in that thinking that were really uncovered during the King County Council process. And there were concerns that the legislation and the way the funds would be distributed, that there were feelings that it wasn't equitable and there wasn't enough community conversation about that. And as a result of that, of course, it really drove to uneven sector support. When we really wanted to be a unified sector championing something, we actually had something that not everyone could get behind, understandably. And that was a problem that dragged on the campaign. Also, time of year and lack of time. The King County Council there was a deadline to get something onto the August ballot, and that was early May. So it was approved by King County Council right at the deadline, which only gave about 3 months to run a massive voter education campaign. So many people had to really have the components of the campaign and the voter proposition explained to them, to voters, and we just didn't have enough time to do that. It took just 1 month just to kind of gear up as a campaign, which then really meant there was only 2 months of an active campaign. Also, we were on the August ballot. It's just a really low, historically low turnout ballot. As Jessi shared, there was only 400,000 people that actually voted on the ballot, which drops way below what you normally see as a turnout, which usually favors pretty positively for initiatives like this when something is on the November ballot. So that was a challenge. Also, there was growing tax fatigue in King County. I want to remind you that in 2016, voters in King County put forward their values around mass transit, and we approved one of them, I think the most significant investment of voter funds into Sound Transit 3, creating the East Link. Well, fast forward in early 2017, when our community members and you probably were renewing your card tabs, all of a sudden you came to realize and got some sticker shock about what exactly that meant. Starting the year, there was a tremendous tax fatigue as people were feeling really burdened, especially imagine, the chagrin of communities that aren't the East Side, that weren't getting that train, not yet, that were paying more money for their tax fatigue, and that was really fueling a great feeling just generally about some of these initiatives that the impact would not be hitting their communities. Also, during the summer, the state legislature had a special emergency session to address the McCleary ruling. If you remember, the Supreme Court had ruled that the state wasn't fulfilling its constitutional obligation by providing the full funding of education. So during the summer, in having to reconcile and come up with a solution for that, it was determined that certain districts homeowners would pay a pretty significant increase in their property taxes to fund schools across Washington state. And that was happening right as the campaign was going on. So even further tax relief. And then right as ballots were hitting people's mailboxes, it was announced that the November renewal vote for the Veteran Housing and Human Services levy in King County would not be a flat renewal, but would double. So all of that was weighing on taxpayers about more money and all of that. Although I do want to remind you that a cultural access initiative would cost each household about $15 to $30, depending on spending habits and income. So it's not a huge amount of taxes, but it didn't really matter considering how much fatigue was out there. Voters narrowly rejected it in August, and we had low support and low turnout from suburban areas throughout South County, as well as up into the Snoqualmie Valley. So these were all the things that contributed to our loss in 2017. But looking ahead, the way that I really like to frame it is that as we've, now that we've made the right changes to the law, we did lose by less than 1/3 of 1%. So what does that mean? It means that winning is within reach. So this is a time where we should be asking ourselves, how do we want to win? Well, in the future for cultural access in King County, we do want to win with a unified cultural sector and a broad, diverse coalition. So we've worked really hard to retool the program in a way that we feel can earn more support from the cultural sector and really inspire the participation of our allies. So imagine, we've talked a lot about the investment that will happen in public schools. So let's campaign with PTSAs and also other school groups as just one small example of how we can build a broad coalition that will champion this with us. Also, we want to win for the communities that benefit. It's easy for us in the sector with all the challenges we're facing to really get caught up in talking about the challenges of running cultural businesses. But as we learned from the 2017 campaign, if we're talking about increasing taxes, we really have to spotlight the added value that voters will receive by supporting this. So yes, our businesses will have an influx of new revenue, but let's talk more about how communities will benefit from an implemented cultural access program. We also want to win by discussing the value of cultural programs. Yes, when we're on the ballot, people will be voting about that. But being on the ballot creates an opportunity for a broad civic discussion about the value of cultural programs, what you do and why it matters. So we look forward to having that conversation with communities and then inspiring them to show up at the polls and support this work with their votes. And also, we don't want to just win with the support of Seattle. We want to win with the support of Black Diamond, with North Bend, with Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, and Bothell, all of our cities across King County, Renton, Federal Way, to get the majority support from all towns so that we can be like the city of Tacoma. One of the most exciting and inspiring things about Tacoma's win is that there are 111 voting precincts in the city of Tacoma, and in their vote for Tacoma Creates, every one of them has majority support for their cultural access program. It wasn't just something championed by a part of town or downtown. It was really the whole Tacoma community that saw value in the program and were optimistic about what it would deliver for them. I do want to talk about what's changed that makes this a very different kind of proposition than it was in 2017. Well, one, we have new leadership. I'm excited to be championing this with a broader view about how we should win this campaign, and also to have a great partner like Brian Carter at 4Culture. Our two organizations are more aligned on how we can work positively together to pursue this. Also, after the loss in 2017, Cultural Access Washington, the organization that championed that campaign, realized that it needed to be more. And by merging with the Washington State Arts Alliance and becoming Inspire Washington with a broader vision for how we support the cultural sector in our local communities and statewide, we believe that we have the right set of values to pursue this. And I hope that over the last several years, all that we've done to really lean into supporting all of your businesses during a really difficult time has really demonstrated what we care about. And of course, the most important thing is we changed the law. It was not easy. I pulled a lot of hair out over this, but I was really thrilled that over 2 legislative sessions, we were finally effective in being able to strip out the funding provisions that had created so much concern and disagreement within our King County cultural sector. At the heart of it, there was a real simple proposition, but it was a very complex process with our partners in Olympia. But at the heart of it, we wanted to make sure that the King County program was the same as all other counties, that there were no special provisions or anything like that in this program. And that really resonated not only with our lawmakers representing King County, but lawmakers representing every other county in Washington State. We removed all of the funding framework, so it is now up to the local authority, 4Culture, in their partnership with King County Council to determine how the funds would be distributed. Because it's always important for local authority that has the most insight to determine what's best. I want to really point out here on the picture on the screen, you'll see our champion representative, Cindy Ryu, who represents the district up there that is included, that includes Shoreline. She was tireless and in her objective of amending the law, and she for several legislative sessions just really stuck with us on this. It was Senate Bill 5792. There was like 4 bills that we introduced over the period of those 2 years, but it was Senate Bill 5792 that eventually gained passage on March 6th. I wrote such a great email to announce this. We really wanted to spend the rest of the month celebrating this and informing all of you, but the world changed dramatically a week later, and that's where the attention needed to be. And of course, one other thing that we're pursuing, and I'll talk more about this soon, especially if you attend some of our upcoming rallies for the legislative session. Since we are, the creators and therefore the godfathers of the Cultural Access Amendment, we're always trying to look at how we can make it better. And over the last 2 legislative sessions, we have explored and introduced bills in Olympia, virtual Olympia, to provide councilmanic authority to the cultural access legislation. And if you don't know what that is, let me explain it to you. Right now, cultural access may only be implemented by a simple majority vote of citizens. But if you get councilmanic authority, it provides one other option. City or county councils may decide that they can implement cultural access, but instead of having a public vote where citizens vote, they vote within the chamber themselves. And the simple majority of council members can pass cultural access and implement it in their communities. We're pursuing this because we believe that cultural access deserves every good tool in the toolbox. And with Washington's 281 cities and towns, there's a lot of different conversations that are happening about how to spur creative economy and cultural programming. And if they want to be able to pass a cultural access quicker than going through the public process of a vote, then they should be able to do that. Other pieces of legislation have this authority, and we just would like to see parity with that to make sure that cultural access gets the same kind of consideration. So we were not successful in the last legislative session because we could not, despite all of our efforts, get our bill out of committee. But there's elections going on right now, and there'll be a lot of new members of the legislature, and we're looking to see who will chair the committee where this bill will most likely be deliberated within. And depending on the outcome of that, we may reintroduce this bill and see if this is a possibility for cultural access.
Sorry. Hi, so I'm Claire, and I'm going to share some information with you about 4Culture, which is the body that would administer funds if there was a cultural access levy. So some folks might be wondering, what is 4Culture? We are actually, our real name is the Cultural Development Authority of King County. We do business as 4Culture. A cultural development authority is a lot like a public development authority, if you've ever heard of that kind of quasi-governmental entity. We have a public funding source, which I'll share a little bit more about. So we have a public revenue source that we have to have certain controls over. We have oversight from the King County Council. They have oversight over our budget and our board, but we have a lot of flexibility in how we how we administer funds to the cultural sector that would be different than if we were an agency of King County. I'm going to read from you a little bit from our charter, which is that 4Culture was created to support, advocate for, and preserve the cultural resources of the region in a manner that fosters excellence, vitality, and diversity. So that was our original charge. And today, our mission is, with a focus on racial equity, we fund, support, and advocate for culture to enhance the quality of life in King County. So you can see how that original charge and our current mission have evolved. And historically, we've done our work through 4 funding categories across 4 departments, which is why we're called 4Culture. So the 4 funding categories, and these are built into our charter, they're sort of areas or buckets of money that we have to make sure we're providing programs to. There's special projects, sustained support, which is really also known as operating funds, cultural facilities, which is funding for brick and mortar projects, acquisition of buildings, things of that sort. And then last, we have a fund, we receive funding through 1% for the Art, which is dedicated dollars towards public art projects. And our 4 departments, which cover a breadth of things across King County, are public art, historic preservation, heritage, and art. And so you might notice there's a little bit of a difference between 4Culture's historic purview and the cultural access levy, which is science and technology. So if there were a cultural access levy, we would bring science and technology into our purview, which would be new. 4Culture's 2 main funding sources, and I consider these pretty stable, are lodging tax and 1% for the Art. So lodging tax was something that 4Culture came into after a period of time where we were working off an endowment, but we came into the lodging tax in 2021. We received 37.5% of that. As you might imagine, it tanked pretty hard in 2020. And so as we got into it in 2021, it wasn't as high as the initial projections were to be, but it's coming back, and we're really glad to be back into that steady source of revenue. And then 1% for the Art is a fund that funds only public art projects, and it's for eligible capital construction projects in King County. So these are things like Harborview, Brightwater, and we have a team that puts together the public art projects as a part of that fund. And then if we were to get a cultural access bill through, that revenue, we consider that to be potential revenue also, and it also would be temporary. So we would have that revenue to put towards the cultural sector for 7 years, and we'd be the administrator of those funds. So now I want to share a little with you about what that program would look like with that cultural access revenue. So right now, I'm just kind of going to go through what sort of the earmarks are for, and then I'll talk to you a little bit more about the detail of what those things mean. But currently, half of the cultural access revenue is set aside for sustained support. So this is operating funds for cultural organizations. If anybody has ever applied to sustained support at 4Culture in the past, this is a type of fund that's very hard to find grant funding for, which is your basic day-to-day operations. The next 2 biggest buckets of money are public schools cultural access and a program that is going to be new to 4Culture, but we actually we're doing a pilot of it, which is public free admission. The next largest bucket is building for equity, which is our cultural facilities fund. The next one is countywide initiatives and projects. And then the 2 smallest allocations are startups and administrative costs. So I'll share with you a little bit more about what those categories mean. So as I mentioned, sustained support, which is the half of the entire cultural access revenue, would be funding to meet day-to-day needs. So rent, utilities, other basic annual expenses. The public school cultural access builds on 4Culture's cultural education program, which has been very small in the past, but this would allow us to have significant funding to do really the way the program is designed is twofold. One, bring students with, so including transportation costs to cultural opportunities, but also have the opportunity to fund organizations and teaching artists to go to school. So we see that as actually like a two-way program to bring more cultural access to students. Public free admission is a program that we are looking to do at 4Culture, and this would bring significant funding to it. This is an opportunity for cultural organizations to invoice 4Culture for free public offerings, like free ticket admission, to help them offset the costs of those producing those offerings. Building for Equity is actually the cultural facilities program we have now. This would just really amplify and build up that revenue, but it allows organizations to acquire, build, or renovate buildings, and also equipment purchases. Countywide initiatives and projects is new. It's actually earmarked as a part of this. 4Culture has over the years seen lots of opportunities for groups to come together in sort of like association way or networks at a regional level, say like organizations all on the east side or South King County. They often wanted to work on things together. For example, marketing and communications is something like that that's very hard for individual organizations to do, but we traditionally haven't had a space to take on those kind of projects or initiatives at 4Culture, and this would be an opportunity to get to meet that cultural sector need. Startups is funds set aside to help with emerging organizations. Given the cost of living and just the cost of everything in King County, it's very, very hard for small or new organizations to establish, because often you have to have some level of establishment to get more funding. So we'd like to set aside money to provide for this need in the sector. And then lastly, this is a set aside in the legislation. We'd have to scale up somewhat to be able to administer all of these programs. So that's administrative cost. And you might be wondering how organizations would receive funding. Similar to how you've received funding in the past, just with a lot more revenue. So 4Culture has the infrastructure, the applications, and the sort of, we have a database model that allows us to kind of work on the back end of what fund would fund organizations, because lodging tax can't fund science and technology, but a cultural access revenue could. So really what would happen is everybody would see would enter 4Culture the same way, apply for grants the way we do it always, where we post criteria, post eligibility, you apply, and then 4Culture would work on the back end to make sure that the correct funding source is applied to those organizations in their award. Organizations could apply to any of the 6 cultural access programs as long as they're eligible organizations through the state legislative language. I know that's a little different for lodging tax. There's certain things where if you receive money through sustained support, there's certain project funding that folks aren't eligible for in a year with lodging tax, but those allowances are different for cultural access funding.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah.
At this point, I want to pause for a second to see if there are any questions about where cultural access has been and where it is now before we talk about future things. Does the group have any questions? If so, go ahead and unmute yourself and jump right in. Oh. Okay, sounds good. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat and we will keep on trucking.
So now we want to discuss looking forward, what it takes to implement a cultural access program. And all of this is visionary. This is cultural access has not been voted on in King County, but this but this is the time when we really have been at Inspire Washington really leaning forward and trying to imagine what the next opportunity would be to pursue this. So first off, it's what we're doing today. and what we did with the 4 other webinars before, and what we'll continue to do here in King County, which is to build a coalition of cultural organizations. And first off, it just starts with just educating people. There's a lot of folks in our community that are new and weren't around in 2017. And there's also folks that just need a refresher about what's changed and what's happened and what is different in the cultural access. So we're just educating right now so that we can be ready in case there's an opportunity to pursue. What's also really important, and what we did not do enough of in the very short campaign time we had last, back in 2017, is that critical pre-campaign work of doing outreach to the communities that will benefit, right? We need to have more conversations and start building out our team for a future cultural access campaign, build momentum in communities, make sure that folks have all their questions answered, and there's a lot of excitement to pursue this. So that's what we're going to be working, hopefully, with all of you on. And of course, we don't get to decide when we're on the ballot. King County Council are the gatekeepers for the ballots. So they are also partners that we have to continue to court and educate and keep them excited about cultural access, and also to work with them to figure out the right timing for when we can pursue this with voters. So that's always in conversation. And of course, once cultural access has left the council chamber and has been referred to the voters to an upcoming election, well, then we're in campaign mode. And Inspire Washington will have to build out architect a campaign apparatus to really deliver the vote, to educate voters, to motivate people to actually vote on this initiative. It will be a very expensive effort. The last time we ran a campaign in King County, it cost about $1.5-ish million. So there's a lot of aspects to a campaign, fundraising and communications and outreach and all of those things. So that would be, the next milestone, and something that we're already spending a lot of time trying to imagine and strategize for. And of course, at the end of the day, the big decision makers are the voters, right? We can have lots of conversations about cultural access, but ultimately it's the voters that decide. They must approve a lift, though small, certainly it is still a lift of taxes. So, so we would, that's the big milestone that will implement cultural access in the end. And then of course, after that, well, it doesn't start to happen immediately. In fact, there's a long kind of ramp up period to deliver a cultural access program, to actually get money out of the door. We learned a lot from our first program with Tacoma. Let me give you an example just of what their timeline was. Voters approved cultural access on the November ballot in 2018. We thought that taxes would start to be collected in January, but it takes a lot of time to really reach out to businesses, to change all the debit card machines, to start collecting that new tax. So taxes, that increased sales tax was actually not, they didn't start collecting it until April of 2019. So that was a number of months, like 6 months. And then of course, it takes a while for all those dimes to add up. And so they did a small distribution of initial funding at the end of summer, but the first real grant round didn't happen until January of 2020. So it's going to take a while, everyone. But of course, now they are now into the rhythm of that tax collection and that investment of public funds.
So where do you all fit into this puzzle? That's what I want to talk about next, is the next steps for cultural access and how you can support the initiative. So we at Inspire Washington envisioned the next possible opportunity for cultural access to be on the ballot would be in November of 2023. So a year from now would be the absolute soonest that we could pull off a cultural access campaign. So there's a lot of time and steps, as Manny mentioned, to get to a vote. And we, of course, cannot do this alone. If cultural access was just about Manny and I going out and talking to everyone, there's no way we could touch everyone in King County. So we need to create a, phone trees system, so to speak, of folks that can help speak towards cultural access all across the county. So the first thing and most importantly thing that you can do is to sign up for our Inspiration League at inspirationleague.org. This is our online voter advocate platform, and it is a great and easy tool for us to connect our advocates and constituents to their lawmakers. So once it's time to start energizing the county council to put this on the ballots, you as an Inspiration League member can then easily, with 2 clicks, send a pre-written email that we have written to your lawmakers, to your county council, urging them to put it on the ballot. So that's the first thing. Most important thing is to be engaged in the advocacy process by joining inspirationleague.org. The next most important thing is for you to become a proactive champion for cultural access. So it's really important to start educating and exciting people about cultural access and just starting to spread the word about it. We got to get the buzz out there again. So, and what does this look like? It's taking 10 minutes in your staff meeting to say, hey, everyone, I heard about this awesome thing called cultural access. It could be a really great opportunity for our organization to create funds and grow our staff and do more outreach and all that kind of stuff. It's meeting with your PTSAs, it's going to your county or your city council meetings and talking at public comment about cultural access and how it's something that people should get on their radar about. So it's just spreading the word at this point and getting them excited and inspiring people to go learn more. And how can you do this? Well, we at Inspire Washington are going to be providing you with talking points, a 1-sheet, and a simplified slide deck based on this slideshow you just saw. We're going to provide it on our Inspiration League website that you can download and then use when and however you'd like. These materials will be available once we're done with these webinars. So by the end of the month, you should be able to go and have them and download them and use them wherever you would like, just to spread the word and start getting people talking about it. Here is what our Inspiration League website looks like. Just so you know, it doesn't say Inspire Washington on it. So I don't want you to think it's not us. It is totally us. So it's at inspirationleague.org. You can click on the very left side. There's a join tab. Just click there, fill out your information. And then a few tabs over, you can click on the cultural access information, and there will be all kinds of stuff that you can utilize, copy and paste, spread, images, things like that. If you want to share on social media or in your newsletters or things like that, that's also where you'll be able to find a slide deck and a 1-sheet and that kind of stuff to download and help spread the word and getting this on people's minds once again. And that is all we have to share with you today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then look at all your beautiful faces or your screens and see if we have any questions. Are there any questions or comments or thoughts about cultural access?
I have a quick hypothetical question. I know you said the earliest you could get it on the ballot is November 2023. Is there any virtue? I know we want to get the funds as possible. I don't want to wait until 25 or 26 to get the funds, but is there any virtue in waiting until 2024 when there would be a possibly larger voter turnout during a presidential election year rather than an off year?
Absolutely, Rachel. Picking the right ballot has many layers to it. Okay. So just to give you a little background and a context, just using this year as a good example. So this is kind of the rhythm of how we will start to do things now that we're all starting to feel a little bit more right side up. We were looking towards this November. We did polling I think we did polling in February of this year, right? Polling is an extensive and very expensive process. It showed us that there was a narrow pathway to potentially win, but not a win that we could feel certain of. Imagine where we were back in January and where people still live today. Growing concerns about inflation, the growing cost of things, affordability coming out of the pandemic, all the things. So because of that, we determined that we would not pursue because we know that it would be a tremendous investment. And we're also really thoughtful about just our spirit of our sector. We've all been kind of jostled around, kicked in the face. It's been so hard, right? We only want to champion a crusade forward when we feel very positive about the outcome. So we will go through this whole process again next year and determine. Now, next year, 2023, we get worried about 24 simply because next year there are 3 key positions on King County Council, 3 of our most ardent supporters, right? So we start to get worried about when we start losing. Right now, we are fortunate to have all of, with the addition of one really wonderful new member, the same King County Council members that put it on the ballot in 2017, and the same executive, right? So we have partners there that we already know believe in it, right? So we get a little bit worried about what does 24 look like? Who is deciding, right? So that's one thing. I mean, but at the same time, what I've really learned about this process is, I know that that it's easy to imagine. Well, with a great campaign, we can turn public sentiment around. Honestly, it's really hard to. It's really hard and expensive to turn deep-seated public sentiment. So instead of figuring out which ballot, it's not just figuring out the ballot that we will fight the hardest for, it's also trying to figure out the ballot that the stream is going in the right direction and we can move in, and it's the right timing. So we're not against 24. You're right. It's going to be a big turnout and probably likely, but we're concerned about the decision makers. That's all my thinking on that. Good question, though. And then also the other complicated nature is that King County has a number of other issues that they, renewals of levy. So there's also just the schedule of ballot initiatives and renewals and other things they've been thinking about. Like, for example, one thing that we felt that we might be competing with this year is King County was interested in a climate bond, right? But for this November, but that too did not poll very well. So anyways, there's layer upon layer upon mind-numbing layer to all of this.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Hi, Manny. Hi, everyone. So Julie Ziegler with Humanities Washington. And this is just great to have the history of cultural access all in one space. So thank you very much for holding these webinars. I'm wondering if you have a strategy for advocating to sympathetic and aligned organizations who won't probably ever be direct recipients of the funding. And I'm thinking specifically of the library community, many of whom serve as community centers in their community. They'll hold cultural programming, but because of their status as a government funded organization in most cases, probably wouldn't qualify, but certainly would be sympathetic.
Absolutely, they're on our list. So we've taken the time to develop, but it's always going through another edit, a really complicated and elaborate stakeholder outreach campaign, right? Because we do recognize that you're right. I mean, those organizations would benefit from this. Cultural groups will use their spaces. We're also thrilled that one of our board members is now the equity lead for King County Libraries. So she'll be a really good champion in that. So yes, as of right now, we're really focusing on education and kind of local chambers and local business groups is kind of like the focus of the fall. But of course we can only do it with everyone rolling up their sleeves, all the cultural organizations, because it's the most basic of mantras. But Jessi and I say this all the time. We get caught up in like, well, we'll talk to that person and that person. We're like, if Jessi and I and Madeline have to talk to every single person in King County to win, we will never win. We just got to keep motivating all of us to build a team, the spirit of a team. So absolutely, thank you for that point, and I'll make sure that I review to see where that is on our plan.
Thanks, glad to hear it.
And thank you for all the work that you do in libraries too. And everyone, please join us we have that Election Day rally to share the state legislative session. We're going to really share the objectives of Humanities Washington, ArtSWA, and all of our partners, as well as our own legislative objectives for the next session. And we're so excited to share that with all of you.
Building on what Julie asked, I was wondering in terms of local arts agencies, for instance, like in Shoreline, Burien, many of the smaller outlying areas of King County in particular, oftentimes they are like the central source where arts programming happens. Are they? And I know 4Culture currently does fund them, so would they also see some benefit from the increased funds should cultural access pass?
Sure. Claire, do you want to take that?
Okay, I wasn't trying to field. So some local arts agencies that are they're housed in a city, they're a city department, and they are ineligible for cultural access revenue. Their communities and all the different organizations that they serve would see a lot of benefit. They wouldn't see, I would argue that theirs is indirect benefit, and then they would see a lot of organizations have direct benefit. There are a number of arts councils that are actually nonprofit that serve as local arts agencies. So like Shore Lake Arts, Maple Valley Arts Council, where they are the local arts agency. They would receive direct benefit from cultural access funding. They would have more access to it. I think one way that municipalities would see pretty strong indirect benefit would be a lot of municipalities have community centers that they offer discounted rent or provide space to community organizations that struggle with operating costs or struggle with rents. And this would provide, or at least through sustained support, those organizations would have access to a lot more revenue for operating costs. So the cities would see that benefit.
And also one other thing that I think that your question also really points out to that also, begs some really good conversation is the exclusions, who's not allowed to be funded within the legislation was really concerning to us, right? I think that there wasn't a lot of imagination at the time from the legislature about, for example, the kinds of great cultural work that happens online, right? And some of the great nonprofit partners that broadcast, that do great work like KEXP, for example. Or the importance of Den Show telling history online, for example, right? Those exclusions were really, it bothered us, and we considered trying to amend that piece of the legislation, but it was one of the most difficult pieces to change, mainly because we were very concerned about opening up the legislation. When you open up past legislation, people start reaching for stuff. And we felt that after our very public campaign, legislators had a better understanding of how much money could be generated for cultural access. So we could not touch the definition section. It went outside. There was a very simple approach of like make King County's program the same as every other county. That was a tight frame in which we could do that. So so we're really grateful about 4Culture's broad view about trying to how that would be administrated appropriately. And we'll have to keep thinking about future legislation about how it is more inclusive, which I think we've worked really hard in the last legislative session to do. But it's I just want to point that out, that was something that we weren't able to change, although we understand why we needed to.
Any other questions from the group? No. Okay, wonderful. Well, it was so nice to see you all today. Like I said earlier, we will be sending a follow-up email to all of you at the end of the month once all of the resources that I talked about are uploaded to the website, so that you may start to access those and spread them in your community. So we really hope you would do that. You do that when the time comes. And as always, if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.